As a co-founder of the Future Laboratory in London, Martin Raymond has worked with some of the most important brands on the globe. He has published several books. One of the books, Create, a look at future foods, trends and upcoming changes in the hospitality industry. In your eyes, what trends will shape the future of alpine tourism and how this is going to happen?
I knew you were going to ask a tough question. I think first of all, let's look at what's going to change tourism. So think about, previously we were traveling purely for, well, it was value, something cheap, something hot, something a bit different, but not too different. Now we are looking at organic, we're looking at purpose, impact, a sense that where we're going to and how we get there isn't contaminating the planet. So we really have to think about not just for the space we arrive into, but where we leave from and how we leave. So one of the fascinating places or reasons about Bolzano's existence is the fact that the majority of people coming here are coming from Italy, for example, from Germany. So it's local travel, reduced carbon footprint. They are not just coming for traditional tourist things, they're coming for food, increasingly organic. They're coming for wines, increasingly biodynamic. They are coming to discover where you have natural programs of reoccupation. So think about the reintroduction of the boar into the region. Some tourists hate that, but a lot of tourists, younger tourists, want that. They want us to understand that a region is about people, identity, about differentiation, but also exploration. So I'm not just coming to sit in a hotel, do a bit of shopping, go and kind of hang out with my mates. I'm coming to understand people and language, and also, I think, how this can contribute to the future benefit of the planet. So if I'm taking those as principles and reasons for travel, the region we're currently in and having this conversation is one of those regions that over the next 10 years, it's just bound to explode. It's got all of those places without even strategically defining them. However, once you start defining them and showing people and telling people, you will see a massive uptick in the right kind of tourists. Because what we're finding around the world is it's easy to get people in, but for sustainability, support, purpose, all of those things, you need to have the right people.
So, Martin, in this regard, if the region South Tyrol would develop itself towards a role model, so if you do some things really good and the community, as you mentioned it, would like this direction we're gonna take, how do you communicate with this community? How do you identify?
Yeah, I mean, traditional marketing, we'd use brochures, we'd use magazines, TV, but now, particularly if you're targeting like Gen Z, for example, they will use TikTok as a search mechanism, a search tool. Television programs, like how many people have watched White Lotus? Pretty much everybody who knows Gen Z watches White Lotus, and they use that as a reference. We talk about, jet setting. They call it set jetting. So they're visiting the places they see on their TV screens. So for example, Paris, Emily in Paris, Lake Como, Casino Royale. So what we need to understand is I guess your advertising should happen where people are consuming it, not necessarily where you think traditionally you place the marketing. So my first choice is TikTok. As a kind of a general tool. Secondly, if I can do any deals with film companies to get them into my region, the right films, that will have much more impact. In fact, I was looking at 38% of Gen Z millennials take their first reference from a TV program before they do any searching on it. Wow. And then the third bit is having ambassadors who are on what I call, kind of travel influencers who are talking about the region. And those ambassadors need to be local. People who are skilled craftspeople, shopkeeper, somebody who drives a taxi, who knows the city and the region as only a local can do it.
Very interesting. Thank you for these insights.
Pleasure.
Martin, let's focus more on the strategy. So, as I mentioned before, we started the interview. We have 6 focus fields defined for the next 10 years. One of these focus fields is the synergy between tourism and agriculture.
Okay.
Because we have a very strong agricultural sector here in the region that is working together with tourism, but not in that intense mode it could be. How strong do you see this synergy in the future, and how would you shape it if you would be in our shoes?
Tough question. I think, we forget that agriculture sits at the core of pretty much all of those, gastronomy, tourism, travel, but we also forget that agriculture in itself can be quite damaging. 60% of damage done to the world biosystem is done by agriculture. 30% of green gas emissions, guess what, is caused by agriculture. So there's a debate and an issue about how we reinvent agriculture for a different age, a different kind of, capacity, position in the world, but also how that connects to tourism. The reason I say that is if I ask a tourist why they're traveling, it's local, it's biodynamic, it's essential, it's unusual. So they give me phrases and terms that represent a value system that at some point only a small number of people in agriculture were thinking about. They were thinking industrial, they were thinking monocrop, they were thinking massive overproduction, where now they're having to think about multi-cropping, to think about organic, to think about biodynamic processes and systems. So suddenly the language of agriculture is becoming similar to the language of tourists. And that means that we can then create a bridge and a dialogue. We know that the farmer, she is producing something that the tourist is already looking for. So the market is preparing for the question that is about to be asked. And that means that the way we start brokering that, so the hotel food, the food that I get in my restaurant when I go to the vineyard, all of these things don't just contain the local requirement, they contain the need and the behavioral aspects that the tourist is seeking out. And that's unusual, because normally what happens is tourists turn up, it's a package deal, there's hardly any reference to the locale or the environment, and certainly no reference to agriculture. Mm-hmm. So I saw an exhibition recently where on my plate I had food with soil, and I was tasting food and tasting soil. Mm-hmm. So the fascinating idea was to connect me back to the soil. And it was exactly the question about the tourist arriving and then being required to understand the language of the farmer, the language of the person producing the wine. And I think suddenly we're now seeing that happening. And I think as a consequence, it is easier for both parties to contribute to the future of how this thing looks. Mm-hmm. So we're in it together, where previously you were trying to get a cheap deal because you were a tourist, and the farmer's trying to get a high price because they never get a high price anyway. And there was always a tension. Mm-hmm. And they were kept separate because they were not seen to be things that should mix together. Now we want to visit the farm, we want to go to the vineyard, we want to see if we eat meat, we want to see where that cow, the pig, the boar, etc. came from. All of this is the beginning of what I call good faith dialogue, and that in any business is the beginning of opportunity, the beginning of innovation, and ultimately I think it's the solution to where we need to be.
Is this then, so we talked about the future targets, moving on TikTok. We have, of course, if we integrate the local foods in our plates, this has its cost, of course. Will they be disposed to spend not just a little higher price for their plates, but a significantly higher price for this locally?
Yeah, it's a tough trade-off, because you know, do you want cheap tourists coming? You know, in some ways you want somebody who's respectful of effort, exactly. Respectful of terroir, respectful of a farmer who has a small holding who's struggling. But if that farmer tells her story, or he tells a story, and you're a visitor, it's very difficult to haggle and say, well, you know, forget that, I still want my burger for this price, etc., etc. Once you know it's a life, and it's a family and a community depending on your desire to eat their food or drink their wine, and then you see that firsthand, then the connection is made. It's like having a friend. You don't cheat on a friend. You don't try to give them cheap food when they visit your house. You give them the best.
So it's about great storytelling and in part education before you arrive.
Yeah, and you know, we forget that you know, behind every plate sits an epic. You know, it hasn't just arrived there. There are so many things going on. There's the weather, there's the sheepdog, there's the cattle being herded on the mountainside, there's the stream, the sunlight, all of these things are around it. And if I could build that into the plate, which is why this exhibition was beautiful, you know, as a designer, as an artist, she really made you eat and taste a single thing, but then you were eating and tasting it next to the soil. And once you recognize the power of the soil, how it was looked after and nurtured, and the people that did that, you began to understand the relationship. And at that point, price, while it's still important, it stops being the key issue that a hotel says, oh, we're the cheapest in the country. You know, we don't say we're the most expensive, but we're the most storied. We have the most connections with our community, and boy, if you come in to chat tonight, you will meet the person that produced this. Wow, I'm there. And I challenge you to find people who will haggle. You know, if they do, you really don't want them in your hotel, you don't want them in your village, you certainly don't want them visiting your region, because ultimately they are not there to take, or rather they're not there to give, they're there to take, which is not a good, you know, idea for tourism today.
Martin, one more question. You would be given the chance to create a business here in our region in the Alpine context. It could be anything. You can create a hotel, a service, whatever you want. You have only two limits. The first limit is it would have to be highly sustainable. The second limit, it would have to drive revenue within the first 3 years. What business would you create and why would it be successful?
Gosh, okay, that's a tough question. My natural inclination, which is completely a wild card because people go, what are you talking about? It's like about farming. I would open a library.
A library?
A library, yes. The reason I say this is my library would contain first editions. It would be the first wine produced, the first food produced, and all of the thinking, the books, the literature that sit around our understanding of these things. And the reason I say that is that it would be a place of contemplation, a place of retreat. It would be a conference center, but a different kind, because it would have all of my communities involved in the conference. It would probably call a transit conference. So if there's a first edition grape wine being released, we would have the literary figures talking about it. I would have my owner of the vineyard, she would come and discuss it. We would then visit it. So the whole idea of this library, it's a brain that sits in the region. And as the region expands, my library, which is not just books, as I say, it's food, it's wine, it's people, because it's a library, it's a living library of people, would also grow with it. So I would think that it won't be hugely profitable, but I think profit in itself isn't sustainable. So I run a business where I realize that I can make enough money to pay everybody. As soon as I try to make more money to pay off other people, it doesn't become a pleasant business. So I would build sustainability into my profitability, knowing that I would always make enough money to cover everything, enough money to, well, actually one of the other things I think we should be doing is how much of our profit goes back into fueling the successes of people who are coming up next. And again, with libraries, you have that permission. Because if you go to any library, you go to any bookshop, there's always a section that's about new. And I always think about, in our business, we think about new all the time. So my library would contain a whole third of it would be about new endeavors, new thinking, new opportunity, new ways to make the region better, more sustainable. But, and I think this is the thing we forget about, everything needs a purpose. And sometimes we forget that we build places, and I think, what's the purpose of this X or Y? And the purpose of my library is always to build on knowledge, challenge the notions of the past was always right. The past was never right, nor was it ever better. We know this. We live longer, we are healthier, we are more educated, we are better. So the past was never better. It has things to teach us, but also what we are doing in this library is helping people think more strategically and effectively about the future.
What a great idea. So it would not be about revenue, but about impact, right?
Impact, and you look, revenue I think comes with, good revenue comes with impact.
Indirectly.
Yeah, and I just feel that sometimes we set up a business to make money. I have never met an entrepreneur who was set out, it's like an artist. No artist could ever believe they're going to make money. Some are hugely successful, but their ambition isn't to make money, their ambition is to make great art. It's like an entrepreneur, his, her, their ambition is to make great changes and differences. Even Jeff Bezos, I once interviewed, I could tell that he never set out to be a billionaire. He set out to change a system that he felt was broken and was run past its sell-by date. And as a consequence, his impact, as we know now, hugely profitable for him, hugely challenging for us. But to go back to the point, he never set out to make money. It was, to your point, he set out to make impact. And that's, I think, good definition for businesses today.
Yeah, definitely. Martin, we have to stop here.
We do
It's
indeed.
been such a pleasure. Thank you for your insights.